Are you ready to fall asleep with 100 interesting facts from 1930s America? Let's begin. Fact 1. 1930. The first Mickey Mouse comic strip appears. In 1930, American readers opened their Sunday newspapers to something new. The very first Mickey Mouse comic strip. Walt Disney's cheerful little character had already been winning hearts on the movie screen since his debut in the animated short Steamboat Willie in 1928. By the early 1930s, Mickey had become a cultural phenomenon, and the move into newspapers only deepened his reach into daily life. The comic strip was illustrated by Ub Iwerks, Disney's early collaborator, and it captured the same playful charm of the animated films. For families living through the Great Depression, the appearance of Mickey's adventures in the funny pages brought an affordable bit of joy. It was free entertainment, accessible with the morning paper, offering laughs and whimsy at a time when so much of life was marked by uncertainty. Children clipped the strips, saving them in scrapbooks, while parents enjoyed the light-hearted escape they provided. Soon, Mickey's adventures expanded into serialized storylines, drawing readers back week after week. Characters like Minnie Mouse, Goofy, and Pluto began to appear alongside him, creating a cast that felt like part of the family. The Mickey Mouse comic strip quickly spread internationally, translated into different languages, and reaching audiences far beyond American shores. It marked the beginning of a print tradition for Disney, bridging the gap between film animation and household reading material. For the first time, Mickey was not just a fleeting character on a screen, he was a companion in everyday life, waiting at the breakfast table beside coffee cups and toast. In hindsight, the launch of the Mickey Mouse comic strip in 1930 symbolized more than entertainment. It showed how American pop culture could adapt across media, and how one small mouse could become a beacon of optimism in troubled times. Fact 2. Radio dramas and the rise of the shadow. During the 1930s, radio became the central medium of entertainment in American homes. Families gathered around large wooden radio sets in the evenings, adjusting the dials until voices and music filled their living rooms. Among the most beloved programs of the decade were the thrilling radio dramas, shows that brought mystery, adventure, and even horror to life through sound alone. One of the most famous creations of this period was The Shadow. The program began in 1930 as a narrator's voice for a detective series, but the character quickly gained popularity, eventually becoming the lead in his own long-running show. The Shadow was portrayed as a mysterious vigilante with the ability to cloud men's minds, rendering himself invisible. His famous catchphrase, delivered in a deep and haunting voice, asked, "Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows." Listeners were captivated. Week after week, they tuned in to hear suspenseful stories where crime was uncovered and justice was served. Unlike movies or comic strips, radio dramas relied entirely on the imagination. Sound effects, creaking doors, footsteps in dark alleys, and eerie laughter created entire worlds in the mind's eye. Radio dramas provided more than entertainment. They were a shared ritual. Neighbors discussed episodes the next day, children whispered about the Shadow's mysterious powers, and adults appreciated the timely moral lessons. Shows like this helped unify communities in an age when affordable distractions were few. The rise of the Shadow also paved the way for the growth of superhero narratives in American culture. The influence of this dark, justice-seeking character can even be traced forward to the creation of comic book heroes in the late 1930s and 40s. In the quiet of a Depression-era evening, with lights low and the radio glowing softly, the Shadow offered both excitement and reassurance. It was a reminder that justice, though mysterious, was always close at hand. Fact 3. Swing and jazz clubs as escape during the Depression. In the 1930s, while the Great Depression weighed heavily on everyday life, music provided a joyful refuge. Across America, swing bands and jazz clubs offered a way to forget economic worries, even if only for a night. Big bands led by figures such as Duke Ellington, Benny Goodman, and Count Basie filled dance halls with energy. The rhythms were bright, the brass sections powerful, and the music urged people onto their feet. For a few coins, patrons could enter a club or ballroom and find themselves immersed in a world of rhythm and laughter. Swing music, with its upbeat tempos and call-and-response style, seemed to chase away the gloom. Couples danced the Lindy Hop, the Jitterbug, and countless variations of lively steps that symbolized both freedom and resilience. Even in small towns, local musicians played in community halls, bringing a taste of the national jazz craze to those far from big cities. Radio broadcasts carried live performances from New York and Chicago, letting families at home share in the excitement. In living rooms, kitchen chairs were pushed aside as children attempted the same dance steps they heard described over the airwaves. Jazz and swing were not just entertainment, they were cultural bridges. They brought together people of different backgrounds and races, especially in northern cities where clubs like the Savoy Ballroom welcomed diverse crowds. Music softened divisions and gave rise to a shared sense of celebration. In a decade marked by scarcity, jazz clubs were a reminder that joy could still be created. For many, the swing era of the 1930s was less about escaping reality and more about proving that creativity, rhythm, and community could survive even the hardest times. Fact 4, 1939. The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind premieres. 1939 is often called one of the greatest years in Hollywood history, and two films stand out as icons of that golden era: The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind. Both premiered that year, capturing the imagination of audiences in very different ways. The Wizard of Oz introduced moviegoers to Dorothy, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion, all brought to life in dazzling technicolor. When the film shifted from the sepia tones of Kansas to the vivid colors of Oz, audiences gasped. For many, it was the first time they had experienced color on the big screen, and the effect was unforgettable. The songs, especially Over the Rainbow, quickly became part of American culture, sung by children and adults alike. Meanwhile, Gone with the Wind offered a sweeping, 4-hour epic about love and survival during the Civil War. It was unlike anything audiences had seen before, with massive sets, thousands of extras, and bold performances by Clark Gable and Vivien Leigh. The film's scale and storytelling ambition symbolized Hollywood's confidence at the end of the decade. These two films, though very different in tone, shared something in common. They offered escape. At the tail end of the Depression, and just as the world was moving toward war, Americans found comfort in fantasy and drama. The magic of Oz and the grandeur of Gone with the Wind became cultural touchstones, still remembered as treasures of cinema. Fact 5. Shirley Temple becomes America's sweetheart. In the darkest years of the Great Depression, one small figure with bright curls and a radiant smile brought hope to millions. Shirley Temple, born in 1928, became America's sweetheart during the 1930s. She starred in a string of successful films such as Bright Eyes, Curly Top, and Heidi, where her singing, dancing, and charm captivated audiences young and old. Her popularity was unprecedented. At a time when families could barely afford luxuries, a ticket to a Shirley Temple movie was seen as an investment in joy. Parents brought children to theaters, knowing they would leave smiling. Her cheerful songs, including On the Good Ship Lollipop, spread far beyond the cinema, sung in schoolyards and kitchens alike. Temple was more than just a performer. She was a symbol of optimism. When adults worried about job losses or farm failures, Shirley Temple reminded them that innocence and laughter still had a place in the world. President Franklin D. Roosevelt even remarked that as long as the nation had Shirley Temple, it would be all right. Her films often emphasized themes of kindness, resilience, and the importance of family, messages that resonated deeply during hard times. Merchandise from dolls to sheet music helped solidify her place in popular culture. By the end of the decade, Shirley Temple had become not only the biggest child star in Hollywood but also a figure of comfort to an entire nation. Her image remains one of the most enduring symbols of hope during the 1930s. Fact 6. Bing Crosby and crooners dominate the airwaves. In the 1930s, as radios became fixtures in nearly every household, the soothing voices of crooners filled the air. At the forefront was Bing Crosby, whose smooth, relaxed singing style redefined popular music. Unlike the brassy, theatrical voices of earlier singers, Crosby used the microphone as an intimate tool, singing as if directly to each listener in their living room. His hits, such as Pennies from Heaven and Brother Can You Spare a Dime, carried both cheerfulness and empathy for the struggles of ordinary people. The latter song, in particular, became an anthem for the Depression, resonating deeply with those facing hardship. Crosby's style was called crooning, a term used to describe singers who used softer tones and emotional nuance. This approach fit perfectly with radio, creating a sense of closeness that audiences adored. Fans felt as though Crosby's voice was meant just for them, a comforting presence during uncertain times. Other crooners, like Rudy Vallee and Russ Columbo, also rose in popularity, but Bing Crosby's combination of talent, charm, and versatility made him the era's most enduring star. He was equally at home in film, appearing in musicals that expanded his influence beyond radio. In a decade where hardship was everywhere, the gentle optimism of Crosby's voice gave listeners comfort. His music helped define the soundscape of the 1930s, laying the foundation for modern popular singing. Fact 7. Monopoly board game. Launched in 1935. In 1935, a new board game appeared that would go on to become one of the most beloved and enduring in the world. Monopoly. Created during the depths of the Great Depression, Monopoly offered players the chance to imagine prosperity, property ownership, and financial success, even if only within the bounds of a game board. The game's origins trace back to earlier prototypes about land ownership and economics, but it was Charles Darrow, an unemployed salesman, who popularized the version that became a household name. Parker Brothers, a major game company, purchased the rights in 1935 and quickly began mass production. Monopoly's premise was simple but endlessly engaging. Players rolled dice, bought properties, collected rent, and sometimes went to jail. The colorful play money, the distinctive tokens, and the chance cards created a world of strategy and rivalry. Families played for hours, often laughing, arguing, and celebrating victories. At a time when real money was scarce and dreams of wealth seemed far away, Monopoly allowed people to experience the fantasy of success. It became not just a pastime but a cultural phenomenon, spreading quickly from America to other countries. The game's enduring popularity proves the timeless appeal of play that combines luck, strategy, and imagination. Born out of the hardship of the 1930s, Monopoly remains a reminder of how creativity can turn even difficult times into opportunities for joy. Fact 8. King Kong thrills audiences in 1933. In 1933, audiences were introduced to one of cinema's most unforgettable creations, King Kong. The film told the story of a giant ape discovered on a mysterious island, captured, and brought to New York City, where he escapes and climbs the Empire State Building. Combining adventure, romance, and cutting-edge special effects, King Kong became a sensation. The movie's groundbreaking stop-motion animation, created by Willis O'Brien, brought the massive creature to life in ways never before seen on screen. Viewers gasped as Kong battled dinosaurs, roared in anger, and tenderly held actress Fay Wray. For many, it was the first true movie monster they had ever encountered, and the combination of fear and sympathy left a lasting impression. Released in the middle of the Depression, King Kong offered both escapism and spectacle. Tickets were affordable, and audiences lined up around theaters to see the marvel for themselves. The film also showcased the Empire State Building, completed just 2 years earlier, turning it into an instant icon. The story of King Kong tapped into themes of wonder, human ambition, and the dangers of exploiting nature. Its success proved the power of film to transport people far beyond their daily struggles. Nearly a century later, King Kong remains a symbol of cinema's ability to inspire awe. Fact 9. Drive-in theaters first appear. In the mid-1930s, a new kind of entertainment venue began to appear in America, the drive-in theater. The very first one opened in Camden, New Jersey, in 1933. The idea was simple, but revolutionary. Families could watch movies from the comfort of their own cars. For just 25 cents per car, plus a small charge per person, audiences could pull into a large outdoor lot, park in front of a massive screen, and enjoy the film under the open sky. This innovation suited the automobile culture that was growing rapidly in America. Parents could bring children without worrying about noise or behavior, and couples found drive-ins a fun and affordable date night. At first, sound quality was a challenge. Large speakers projected the audio, and not every seat or car had the best experience. But over time, individual car speakers and improved technology made drive-ins even more enjoyable. Drive-in theaters symbolized freedom and convenience, blending America's love for cars with its passion for cinema. Though they were only beginning in the 1930s, the idea would grow dramatically in later decades, becoming a nostalgic hallmark of mid-20th century life. Fact 10. Snow White. In 1937, Disney's first feature-length animation. In 1937, Walt Disney Studios released Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the first full-length animated feature film in cinema history. Many had doubted the project, calling it Disney's folly, but the gamble paid off in spectacular fashion. Audiences were enchanted by the story of Snow White, her 7 companions, and the evil queen. The film's use of Technicolor animation was breathtaking. Every scene glowed with richness and detail, and the dwarfs' personalities were so distinct that they felt alive. Songs such as Hi-Ho and Someday My Prince Will Come quickly became part of the cultural fabric. Snow White was more than just entertainment. It was a landmark achievement in filmmaking. It proved that animation could tell long, emotionally complex stories, paving the way for decades of animated classics. For Depression-era audiences, the movie provided a magical escape into a world of fantasy, beauty, and hope. Children were spellbound, and adults marveled at the artistry. The success of Snow White made Disney an international powerhouse and cemented animation as a serious and respected art form. Fact 11. Fashion in cinema inspires everyday style. The 1930s was a decade where Hollywood fashion strongly influenced what ordinary people wore. With the Great Depression limiting spending power, clothing styles emphasized elegance without extravagance. The silver screen became the place where dreams of sophistication were born. Actresses like Greta Garbo, Carole Lombard, and Jean Harlow dazzled audiences with satin gowns, bias-cut dresses, and glamorous hairstyles. These styles were carefully imitated by women across America, often recreated in more affordable fabrics. Magazines published sewing patterns inspired by movie wardrobes, allowing families to bring a touch of Hollywood into their homes. Men's fashion also reflected cinema. Stars such as Clark Gable popularized broad-shouldered suits, neat ties, and polished shoes. Even small details, like the way he wore his hair or tilted a fedora, quickly spread into popular culture. Clothing stores began to advertise garments as being seen on the stars, further blurring the line between film fantasy and everyday reality. Despite economic hardship, fashion in the 1930s symbolized dignity. People wanted to look sharp even if money was tight. Clothes were mended, recycled, or handmade, but the goal was to remain stylish. For women, dresses often had slim silhouettes, puffed sleeves, and modest hems. For men, workwear remained practical, but on Sundays or evenings out, tailored jackets made appearances. Cinema made glamour accessible. Audiences could watch a film for a few cents, then leave with ideas for hairstyles, makeup, or clothing to try at home. The influence of fashion in cinema during this decade remains one of the most powerful examples of how film shapes culture. Fact 12. The decline of vaudeville. By the 1930s, vaudeville, once America's premier form of popular entertainment, was fading. For decades, variety shows featuring comedians, singers, dancers, and novelty acts had filled theaters. Entire families toured the country performing in circuits, making vaudeville both a livelihood and a cultural staple. But two forces spelled its decline: movies and radio. With the spread of talkies after 1927 and the rapid rise of household radios in the 1930s, audiences no longer needed to attend live variety shows for entertainment. A movie ticket cost less, and radio offered free, continuous amusement from the comfort of home. Some performers transitioned successfully. Stars like Bob Hope, Jack Benny, and Burns and Allen began their careers in vaudeville, but moved into radio and film, carrying elements of vaudeville humor into new media. Others, however, found themselves without work as theaters closed and audiences dwindled. The decline of vaudeville was bittersweet. It marked the end of a uniquely American tradition, but its spirit lived on in television comedy, variety shows, and stand-up acts that would flourish in later decades. For the 1930s, however, it was a reminder that entertainment was shifting into new, modern forms. Fact 13. Hollywood stars become cultural icons. The 1930s cemented the idea of the movie star. With the studio system in full swing, Hollywood carefully crafted the images of actors and actresses, turning them into larger-than-life figures admired worldwide. Clark Gable became known as the King of Hollywood, especially after his role in Gone with the Wind. Jean Harlow dazzled as the blonde bombshell, while Greta Garbo captivated audiences with her mysterious allure. Shirley Temple charmed families as the child star of the decade, while actors like James Cagney and Humphrey Bogart brought grit and charisma to the screen. Studios controlled nearly every aspect of their stars' lives, from the roles they played to the way they dressed and spoke in public. Fan magazines and glossy photographs spread their images, creating a new kind of celebrity culture. For many Americans struggling in the Depression, following the lives of movie stars was a form of escape and inspiration. This era also saw the rise of international fame. Hollywood's reach extended far beyond the United States, exporting American culture around the world. The glamour of these stars shaped beauty standards, fashion trends, and even ideas of romance. The creation of the Hollywood star system in the 1930s permanently transformed entertainment, establishing the foundation for celebrity culture as we know it today. Fact 14. The rise of gangster films. In the early 1930s, gangster films exploded in popularity. Titles such as Little Caesar, 1931, The Public Enemy, 1931, and Scarface, 1932, depicted organized crime, prohibition, and the violent underworld that fascinated audiences. James Cagney's portrayal of Tommy Powers in The Public Enemy made him a household name, especially the shocking scene where he pushes a grapefruit into a woman's face. Edward G. Robinson and Paul Muni also rose to prominence in these gritty roles. The films reflected public anxieties about crime during the Prohibition era, but also delivered the excitement of rebellion. Censors soon grew uneasy with the glorification of gangsters. In response, films were required to show that crime ultimately led to downfall. Gangsters were often punished in the end. This balance kept the genre alive while reassuring audiences that justice prevailed. Gangster films became an enduring Hollywood tradition, setting the stage for later classics in the 1940s and beyond. Their rise in the 1930s showed how film could mirror both society's fears and its fascination with defiance. Fact: 15. Radio comedy brings laughter to hard times. In a decade filled with hardship, laughter was vital, and radio comedy delivered it directly into American homes. Shows such as the Jack Benny Program, Burns and Allen, and Amos and Andy attracted millions of listeners each week. Families would gather around the radio, often after dinner, and share in the humor together. Jack Benny became a national figure, with his carefully timed pauses, stingy character, and ongoing gags about his age and violin playing. George Burns and Gracie Allen delighted audiences with witty banter and playful misunderstandings. The accessibility of radio comedy was key. It was free once a household had a radio, making it one of the most affordable ways to find joy during the Depression. Listeners developed strong bonds with radio comedians, who felt like personal friends. Their catchphrases and jokes entered everyday conversation, proving how deeply comedy could influence culture. By lightening the burdens of everyday life, radio comedy helped define the soundscape of the 1930s and showed the power of humor as a tool of resilience. Fact 16. The Dust Bowl shapes rural life. In the mid-1930s, vast areas of the American plains experienced devastating dust storms, a crisis known as the Dust Bowl. Years of drought, combined with poor farming practices, stripped the soil of nutrients and left it vulnerable to erosion. Winds carried massive clouds of dust across states such as Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, and Colorado, turning daytime into darkness. Families living in these regions endured unimaginable hardship. Crops failed, livestock died, and health suffered from dust pneumonia. Many farmers abandoned their land altogether, migrating west in search of work and survival. This exodus inspired John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, 1939, which gave voice to the struggles of displaced families. The Dust Bowl was both an environmental and human disaster, forcing the nation to rethink farming practices. The federal government introduced soil conservation programs and encouraged crop rotation, contour plowing, and planting of windbreaks. Though rooted in hardship, the lessons of the Dust Bowl shaped future agricultural policy and reminded Americans of the importance of respecting the land. It remains one of the most powerful symbols of resilience during the 1930s. Fact 17. Technicolor transforms movies. Before the 1930s, most films were in black and white. But during this decade, Technicolor technology revolutionized cinema by introducing vivid, realistic colors. Early experiments in the late 1920s were refined, and by the mid-30s, audiences could watch films bursting with hues never before seen on the big screen. Movies such as Becky Sharp, 1935, the first full-length Technicolor feature, and The Adventures of Robin Hood, 1938, starring Errol Flynn, showed the potential of this innovation. Costumes and sets seemed to leap from the screen, captivating audiences who had grown accustomed to grayscale. The arrival of color films symbolized progress and optimism, offering a brighter view of the world at a time when life was often difficult. Though black and white films remained common, the growing use of Technicolor marked a turning point in cinema's visual storytelling. By the end of the decade, with films like The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind, Technicolor had secured its place as one of Hollywood's most important innovations. Fact 18. Amelia Earhart's final flight in 1937. One of the most compelling figures of the 1930s was Amelia Earhart, the pioneering aviator who broke barriers for women in aviation. She became the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic in 1932, capturing the admiration of the world. Earhart's boldness and determination symbolized independence and courage. She wrote books, gave lectures, and encouraged women to pursue careers in fields traditionally closed to them. Her fame grew as she continued setting records and attempting daring flights. In 1937, Earhart embarked on her most ambitious journey, a flight around the world. Tragically, she disappeared over the Pacific Ocean near Howland Island, along with her navigator Fred Noonan. Despite extensive search efforts, neither she nor her plane was ever found. Her disappearance became one of the greatest mysteries in aviation history, but her legacy endures. Amelia Earhart remains an icon of adventure, courage, and the determination to challenge limits. Fact 19. The New York World's Fair of 1939. In 1939, New York hosted a World's Fair that looked boldly toward the future. Its theme, The World of Tomorrow, captured the imagination of millions of visitors. Exhibits showcased innovations in science, technology, and design, offering hope at the end of a turbulent decade. The fair introduced the public to wonders such as early televisions, futuristic cars, and streamlined household appliances. The Trilon and Perisphere, two massive architectural structures, became symbols of the fair and of modern design. Visitors marveled at the promise of progress. In a world edging toward war, the fair represented optimism, suggesting that human creativity and technology could build a better tomorrow. For many who attended, it was an unforgettable experience of seeing the future unfold before their eyes. The New York World's Fair remains one of the most iconic expositions in history, embodying the hopes of the 1930s and pointing the way toward the modern world. Fact 20. The rise of swing dancing. The 1930s gave birth to a lively cultural phenomenon, swing dancing. Fueled by big band music, this energetic style of dance became a nationwide craze. The Savoy Ballroom in Harlem was one of the most famous venues, where dancers perfected the Lindy Hop, a fast-paced, acrobatic dance filled with spins, flips, and improvisation. Couples of all ages flocked to dance halls, where the music of Duke Ellington, Benny Goodman, and Count Basie kept floors alive with rhythm. Swing dancing was more than just fun, it was a form of social connection. In an era of economic strain, it provided young people with a way to express freedom, joy, and resilience. Competitions, dance marathons, and radio broadcasts spread the craze far and wide. By the end of the decade, swing had become a defining feature of American culture, symbolizing both the energy of youth and the power of music to bring people together. Fact 21. A loaf of bread costs 9 cents. In the 1930s, during the depths of the Great Depression, the cost of basic groceries was a vital measure of survival for families. A simple loaf of bread, a household staple, averaged just 9 cents. On the surface, that seems remarkably inexpensive compared to modern times, but it must be remembered that wages were drastically lower. Many people earned only a few dollars per week, and unemployment often made even those small earnings uncertain. Bread was central to the American table, especially in working-class and rural households. Families stretched meals with sandwiches, toast, or bread served alongside soups and stews. In many cases, bread became the anchor food, filling stomachs when little else could be afforded. Bakers and grocers often extended credit to struggling customers, keeping track of small debts in handwritten ledgers. In some neighborhoods, children were sent with coins to the bakery each morning, carrying home warm loaves wrapped in paper. Community efforts also played a role. Churches and charitable groups sometimes distributed bread or sponsored free meals for the unemployed. Because it was affordable and filling, bread became not only food, but also a symbol of endurance. The phrase, bread line, entered everyday language as thousands of people stood in lines for free bread and soup in American cities. Despite hardship, bread was also connected to family rituals. Baking at home remained common, especially in rural areas. Mothers and grandmothers passed down recipes, and the smell of bread baking offered warmth and reassurance. Whether store-bought or homemade, that 9-cent loaf carried enormous cultural weight during the 1930s, representing both scarcity and resilience in difficult times. Fact 22. Average new car price, $640. The 1930s were a decade of contrasts for the American automobile industry. On one hand, the Great Depression reduced consumer spending, forcing many families to hold onto their vehicles longer. On the other, car prices remained surprisingly low compared to future decades. The average cost of a new car hovered around $640. This price, while seemingly affordable today, was still a major purchase for families earning modest weekly wages. Many households relied on installment payment plans offered by dealerships, spreading out the cost over several months or even years. Cars were not just luxuries, they were lifelines, especially for rural families and Dust Bowl migrants seeking opportunities elsewhere. Automobiles of the era reflected both innovation and practicality. Ford, Chevrolet, and Chrysler led the market, offering sturdy models with simple engines that could withstand rough roads. Streamlined designs slowly replaced the boxier styles of the 1920s, reflecting the growing influence of aerodynamics and modern aesthetics. Gasoline prices remained relatively steady, often under 20 cents a gallon, which made driving accessible to those who could afford the car itself. Road trips became part of American leisure, and new highways expanded mobility. The $640 automobile symbolized more than transportation. It represented freedom during uncertain times, hope for upward mobility, and a promise of the modern age. Families who could manage the expense treasured their cars, often maintaining them for years. In the culture of the 1930s, owning a vehicle was both a practical necessity and a marker of dignity. Fact 23. The Sears catalog as the Amazon of its time. Before online shopping, before malls, and even before many rural stores, Americans turned to the Sears, Roebuck, and Company catalog. In the 1930s, the Sears catalog was often called the Amazon of its time because it offered nearly everything a family might need, delivered by mail. From clothing to tools, household goods to farm equipment, the catalog spanned hundreds of pages. Rural families in particular relied on it, since traveling to town could be difficult or costly. Children eagerly flipped through the toy section, while adults studied clothing, kitchenware, and even building supplies. One of the most remarkable offerings was the Sears Modern Home Kit. Families could order an entire house, shipped in pieces by rail, complete with lumber, nails, and instructions. These homes still stand across America as evidence of the catalog's influence. Ordering from Sears represented more than convenience. It connected isolated households to the broader consumer culture, making people in rural Kansas or Oklahoma feel linked to the same trends as families in New York or Chicago. During the Depression, prices in the catalog reflected the careful balance between affordability and aspiration. For many, receiving the thick book in the mail each season was an event, a chance to dream and plan for better days. Like today's online browsing, the Sears catalog in the 1930s blended practicality with imagination, changing the way Americans shopped. Fact 24. Kitchen refrigerators slowly replace iceboxes. In the early 1930s, most American households still relied on iceboxes, wooden or metal chests kept cold by blocks of ice delivered by local icemen. But as the decade progressed, electric refrigerators slowly began to replace them, marking one of the most significant changes in domestic life. At first, refrigerators were expensive and considered luxury items. By the mid-30s, however, prices began to fall, and new models from companies like Frigidaire and General Electric made them more accessible to middle-class families. Ads promoted their cleanliness, safety, and convenience, contrasting them with the constant need for ice delivery. Refrigerators changed eating habits. Families could store perishable food for longer, reducing waste and allowing more variety in meals. Leftovers could be kept instead of thrown away, and items like milk, butter, and fresh vegetables became easier to preserve. This technological shift also reshaped industries. Ice delivery declined rapidly, while appliance manufacturing grew. The refrigerator became a symbol of modern living, often showcased in kitchens as a sign of progress. By the end of the 1930s, although not every household owned one, the refrigerator was well on its way to becoming a standard appliance. The transition from icebox to refrigerator marked the steady march toward modern domestic convenience. Fact 25. Woolworths 5 and dime stores thrive. During the Great Depression, when money was tight, Woolworths 5 and dime stores offered affordable shopping for millions of Americans. These chain stores, found in cities and small towns alike, sold everyday goods for 5 or 10 cents, making them accessible to nearly everyone. Customers could purchase household items, toys, sewing supplies, and inexpensive clothing under one roof. The stores were brightly lit and neatly arranged, a welcoming place to browse even for those with little money to spend. For children, Woolworths often represented a treat, with aisles of candy and small toys within reach of pocket change. Many Woolworth stores also featured lunch counters. For a few cents, customers could enjoy a sandwich, a slice of pie, or a cup of coffee, making these counters social hubs. Even during difficult economic times, Woolworths allowed people to experience a sense of normalcy, comfort, and community. The success of Woolworths during the 1930s was rooted in its ability to combine affordability with familiarity. It became an institution of American retail, and for many, shopping there was woven into the rhythm of daily life. Fact: 26 Sunday dinner traditions. In the 1930s, Sunday dinner was one of the most important rituals of family life. At a time when hardship was common, and many meals during the week were frugal or repetitive, the Sunday table was prepared with special care. Families often gathered in larger numbers, bringing together grandparents, parents, children, and sometimes neighbors or friends. Meals varied depending on region and income, but common themes included roasted meats, vegetables from the garden, homemade bread, and desserts such as pies or cakes. Even in households struggling through the Great Depression, families tried to make Sunday dinner distinct stretching ingredients to provide a sense of abundance. Chickens were often raised at home, and a roast could feed several people, with leftovers used for sandwiches or soups during the week. The tradition had cultural as well as spiritual meaning. For many families, Sunday morning began with church services, and the meal that followed was part of honoring the Sabbath. It represented togetherness, gratitude, and a pause from the struggles of everyday survival. Children remembered the warmth of these meals long after, with the smell of roasted meat or fresh pie evoking comfort and stability. Sunday dinner was also a space for conversation, storytelling, and passing down values. In rural communities, where neighbors lived far apart, inviting others to join the table strengthened bonds. Even in cities, Sunday meals often tied immigrant families to their heritage, with recipes reflecting traditions brought from Italy, Poland, or Ireland. In the landscape of the 1930s, where uncertainty touched nearly every household, Sunday dinner stood as a reassuring anchor. It was not just about food, but about the ritual of gathering, the hope of better days, and the resilience of families who found joy in simple traditions. Fact: 27 Dust Bowl hardships. Few images of the 1930s are as enduring as those of the Dust Bowl. Stretching across parts of Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, Colorado, and New Mexico, the Dust Bowl was both an environmental disaster and a human tragedy. Drought, combined with years of poor farming practices, left the soil dry and exposed. Winds whipped the land into towering clouds of dust that darkened skies and buried farms. For families, life was relentless. Dust coated everything: furniture, clothing, even food. Children wore masks or cloths over their mouths to breathe. Livestock often died, and crops failed year after year. Dust pneumonia became a real and frightening condition. Many families, especially small farmers, could no longer survive. Thousands loaded their belongings into trucks or wagons and migrated west, particularly to California. These migrants, often called Okies, faced further hardships as they searched for work in fields and orchards. The story of these families inspired John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath in 1939, which gave voice to their resilience and despair. Government programs attempted to address the crisis, teaching soil conservation techniques such as crop rotation and planting windbreaks. While progress was slow, these lessons reshaped American farming. The Dust Bowl symbolized the fragility of both land and livelihood, yet it also revealed a deep strength in the families who endured, moved forward, and rebuilt their lives despite overwhelming obstacles. Fact: 28. Coca-Cola's rising popularity. Coca-Cola was already a known brand before the 1930s, but during this decade, it rose to become one of America's most recognized symbols. Priced at just 5 cents per bottle, Coca-Cola was affordable even in difficult times, making it a small luxury that families could enjoy without great expense. Advertisements of the period emphasized refreshment, optimism, and modern living. Posters and magazine ads depicted smiling families, cheerful workers, and athletes enjoying the beverage. During the Depression, Coca-Cola represented not only a drink, but also a message of comfort and familiarity. The brand also expanded its reach during this decade. Bottling plants increased across the country, ensuring distribution to both cities and rural towns. Coca-Cola's famous Contour bottle, introduced earlier, became an iconic part of American design. At the same time, Coca-Cola tied itself to culture. From sponsoring radio programs to placing signs in corner stores, the company positioned itself as part of everyday life. its association with American values of optimism and energy would continue to grow in later decades. By the end of the 1930s, Coca-Cola had become more than a soda. It was a symbol of endurance, a treat that brought comfort in uncertain times, and a cultural force that would spread worldwide. Fact: 29 payphones in corner drugstores. In the 1930s, before most households had telephones, payphones provided a crucial link for communication. These coin-operated phones were commonly installed in corner drugstores, bus stations, hotels, and restaurants. Dropping a nickel into the slot gave callers a few minutes to connect with family, conduct business, or send urgent messages. Drugstores became especially associated with payphones. Customers could stop in, buy a soda or a newspaper, and use the phone. It was a small but important part of urban and small-town life. For travelers, payphones were essential, allowing them to check in while on the road. The payphone was more than convenience, it symbolized modern connectivity. Even people who could not afford their own home phone had access to the expanding telephone network. Conversations were often short, but they carried great weight, whether arranging a meeting, sharing news, or keeping in touch across distance. In a decade when personal contact was treasured and often difficult to maintain, the payphone offered a lifeline. Its presence in everyday spaces like drugstores made it part of the social fabric, linking communities during a time of widespread change. Fact 30. Popular hairstyles and hats. Fashion in the 1930s was not only about clothing but also about the way people styled their hair and accessorized with hats. For women, hairstyles often featured soft waves, curls, and carefully sculpted shapes. The finger wave became iconic, achieved with combs, setting lotion, and patience. Shorter hairstyles remained popular, though by the late decade, slightly longer and more feminine styles returned. Men's hairstyles were neat and polished, with hair slicked back using pomade or oil. The clean, well-groomed look reflected the influence of Hollywood stars like Clark Gable. Hats completed the picture. Women wore cloche hats in the early 30s, shifting later to wide-brimmed or tilted hats adorned with ribbons or feathers. Men rarely went without a hat. Fedoras, trilbies, and flat caps were standard, with each style signaling personality or social standing. Hats served both fashion and function, protecting wearers from sun or rain while expressing individuality. They also reflected the dignity people sought during the Depression. Even when money was scarce, a stylish hat or neat hairstyle allowed someone to present themselves with pride. In the 1930s, hairstyles and hats were more than trends. They were part of how people faced the world with confidence, carrying elegance into everyday life despite economic challenges. Fact 31. Depression-era diets. The diets of families in the 1930s were shaped as much by necessity as by tradition. With the Great Depression reducing incomes and in many cases eliminating jobs, meals were often planned around the most filling, inexpensive, and available ingredients. Beans, potatoes, bread, and cornmeal became staples, stretching budgets and providing energy for hard labor. Dishes like bean soup, cornbread, and potato stew appeared frequently on household tables. Meat was less common than in earlier decades, often reserved for Sunday dinners or special occasions. When it was served, families used every part of the animal, from roasting a chicken to boiling bones for broth. Offal cuts, such as liver, kidneys, or tripe, became more common as cheaper alternatives. Gardens played a critical role, with many families planting vegetables to ensure food security. Community gardens also appeared in towns and cities, helping neighbors share produce. Canning was widespread, with women preserving fruits and vegetables to last through the winter months. Jams, pickles, and canned tomatoes often filled shelves, creating a buffer against hunger. Recipes emphasized creativity, finding ways to make simple ingredients more palatable. Depression cake, baked without eggs or milk, became a symbol of ingenuity in the kitchen. Nutrition was not always balanced, but resilience showed in the effort to stretch ingredients. School lunch programs emerged in some cities, ensuring children had at least one hot meal a day. These meals often included milk, bread, and soup. Depression-era diets revealed the adaptability of American families. Despite scarcity, meals continued to serve as a source of comfort, community, and family connection. Out of necessity grew traditions and recipes that would remain part of the cultural memory long after the economy recovered. Fact 32. Roadside diners. In the 1930s, the rise of the automobile reshaped the American landscape, and with it came the popularity of roadside diners. Small, Often prefabricated buildings set along highways or busy roads provided weary travelers with affordable meals. Their design, narrow, efficient, and sometimes styled like rail cars, made them accessible and charmingly modern. Menus were straightforward: bacon and eggs, hamburgers, pie, and strong coffee. These dishes were inexpensive, filling, and quick to prepare, catering to both working-class locals and travelers passing through. Diners became democratic spaces, welcoming factory workers, salesmen, truck drivers, and families alike. The atmosphere carried a blend of practicality and friendliness. Waitresses knew regulars by name, and travelers found comfort in predictable menus. The counter, with stools, gleaming coffee urns, and neon signs, became hallmarks of the diner aesthetic. Roadside diners also reflected broader social changes. As the country struggled through the Great Depression, these establishments offered both jobs and affordable food. Many owners were immigrants who saw the diner as a gateway into American enterprise. By the end of the decade, diners had become woven into American identity. They symbolized not only sustenance but also mobility, the idea that anyone could hit the road, find a hot meal, and keep moving forward. Fact 33. Gasoline prices. In the 1930s, the price of gasoline was remarkably low by modern standards, averaging between 10 and 20 cents per gallon. This affordability was essential in a nation where automobiles were becoming central to daily life. Families depended on cars not only for work but also for leisure, particularly as long road trips grew in popularity. Although prices fluctuated with the effects of the Depression, gasoline remained within reach for most drivers. Oil companies competed fiercely, leading to promotions, giveaways, and distinctive branding. Filling stations became common fixtures, often featuring uniformed attendants who pumped gas, checked oil, and cleaned windshields as part of the service. Despite low prices, many families still used their vehicles sparingly, conserving fuel to save money. Carpooling was common, and road trips were carefully planned. Yet, for those who could afford the journey, inexpensive gasoline opened the road to opportunity and escape, especially for Dust Bowl migrants heading west. The affordability of gasoline helped cement the car as a permanent feature of American life. By the end of the decade, the automobile was no longer just a luxury, it was a necessity, supported by a network of highways, diners, and filling stations, all built on the foundation of cheap fuel. Fact 34. WPA murals. The Works Progress Administration, WPA, launched in 1935, sought to provide jobs during the Great Depression. Among its many projects, the Federal Art Project commissioned artists to create murals across the country. These murals, painted in schools, libraries, post offices, and courthouses, reflected both national pride and local life. Artists were encouraged to depict scenes of labor, agriculture, history, and community. As a result, towns saw their own stories immortalized in colorful, large-scale artworks. Farmers harvesting fields, steel workers in factories, and pioneers building homes became common themes. The murals celebrated dignity in work and unity in adversity. For many communities, WPA murals were the first exposure to large public art. They gave artists a platform while making art accessible to everyday Americans. The initiative also preserved jobs for thousands of painters, many of whom later became well-known figures in American art. These works remain part of the nation's cultural heritage, embodying the belief that art could uplift and inspire during hard times. They stood as visual testaments to resilience and as reminders that creativity had a place even in economic struggle. Fact 35. Penny candy and small luxuries. During the hardships of the 1930s, small pleasures carried immense weight. One of the most beloved was penny candy, sold at local corner stores or five-and-dime shops. With just a single cent, children could purchase a sweet treat, peppermints, caramels, gumdrops, or licorice that offered a moment of delight in otherwise austere times. Penny candy symbolized the importance of affordable indulgence. For families that could not afford vacations or new clothes, these tiny luxuries became treasured. Parents often gave children a penny for good behavior or as a special reward, creating memories tied to the ritual of choosing sweets. The experience was just as important as the candy itself. Children would stand before glass jars filled with colorful confections, carefully considering which treat to buy. This moment of choice carried a sense of agency and joy during a period when much of life felt constrained. These simple indulgences reflected the resilience of communities. Even in times of scarcity, people sought out ways to preserve joy, and candy shops offered exactly that, a reminder that sweetness could still be found, 1 penny at a time. Fact 36. Roadside billboards. The 1930s were a transformative decade for advertising, especially along America's expanding highway system. As automobiles became essential to daily life, companies realized the potential of reaching travelers directly on the road. Roadside billboards began springing up across rural and urban routes, transforming landscapes into canvases for bold, colorful messages. Billboards typically promoted tobacco, soft drinks, motor oil, and food chains, often featuring simple slogans designed to be read at high speed. Painted by skilled sign artists, these massive displays were vibrant and eye-catching, with bright reds, yellows, and greens. Brands like Coca-Cola and Burma Shave became household names thanks to their clever roadside campaigns. The Burma Shave signs were particularly iconic. Rather than a single billboard, they used a series of small signs spaced along the road, each carrying a few words of a humorous rhyme. Drivers and passengers eagerly read them aloud, anticipating the punchline as they drove past. This interactive form of advertising was entertaining during long trips, making it one of the most memorable marketing strategies of the era. Billboards also reflected cultural values, emphasizing affordability, freshness, or modernity. They captured the spirit of optimism even amid the Depression by promoting dreams of leisure, comfort, and progress. By the end of the decade, the roadside billboard had become a defining part of American travel, cementing its place in both commerce and popular culture. Fact 37. Early supermarkets. While small neighborhood grocers had long served communities, the 1930s marked the rise of the modern supermarket. Stores like King Cullen, founded in 1930 in New York, introduced the idea of large, self-service shopping with wide aisles, variety, and discounted prices. Customers could push carts, browse shelves freely, and check out at central registers, innovations that reshaped consumer habits. Supermarkets offered unprecedented convenience. Instead of visiting separate shops for meat, produce, and dry goods, shoppers could find everything under one roof. This was especially valuable during the Depression, when families sought bargains and efficiency. Low prices were made possible through bulk purchasing and streamlined operations, which supermarkets pioneered. The experience itself was novel. Bright fluorescent lighting, polished floors, and organized displays gave a sense of modernity. Shoppers were encouraged to browse, discovering new products like packaged cereals, canned soups, and branded baked goods. Promotional flyers and special sales created a sense of excitement around grocery shopping. Supermarkets also reflected changes in American life, from growing urban populations to the rising importance of household budgeting. By the end of the 1930s, they were no longer a novelty, but an expanding trend that would dominate food retail in the decades to come. Fact 38. New Deal sewing circles. During the Great Depression, New Deal programs not only provided employment, but also strengthened communities through practical initiatives. One example was sewing circles organized under relief programs, often supported by the Works Progress Administration or local charities. These gatherings brought women together to produce clothing, quilts, and household items for families in need. Sewing circles were more than just practical aid, they were social lifelines. Women shared patterns, exchanged techniques, and offered emotional support during difficult times. For many, the gatherings provided a sense of purpose and community, while also preserving traditional skills. Quilting bees, already part of American heritage, experienced a revival as groups stitched together colorful fabrics into warm, useful blankets. The garments created were distributed through relief agencies to children, unemployed workers, and displaced families. Some circles even taught sewing to younger generations, ensuring that practical skills would endure. Beyond function, these handmade items carried personal touches, embroidery, patchwork, or small decorative flourishes that reflected care and creativity. In a time of scarcity, sewing circles symbolized resilience and solidarity. They reminded communities that even when resources were limited, people could contribute their time and skill to lift one another up. These traditions of mutual aid left a lasting impression on American cultural memory. Fact 39. Traveling circuses. Despite the hardships of the 1930s, entertainment found ways to brighten lives. Traveling circuses remained popular, bringing excitement and wonder to towns across America. For many rural families, the arrival of the circus was the highlight of the year, offering a temporary escape from everyday struggles. Circuses featured acrobats, clowns, animal acts, and elaborate parades that marched through town to announce their arrival. The spectacle was grand, with brightly colored tents, music, and performers who seemed larger than life. Companies like Ringling Bros and Barnum and Bailey traveled by train, setting up massive shows that could dazzle audiences for hours. Ticket prices were kept affordable, allowing even Depression-era families to attend. The circus grounds also hosted sideshows with curiosities and games, creating a fair-like atmosphere. For children especially, the circus sparked awe elephants, trapeze artists, and fire breathers provided magical memories. Yet circuses were more than entertainment. They represented resilience and mobility. At a time when many were tied to struggling farms or towns, the traveling circus embodied freedom, movement, and the thrill of the extraordinary. They stitched together communities with a shared sense of wonder, proving that joy could still thrive even in lean times. Fact: 40 public libraries, an escape through books. In the 1930s, public libraries served as sanctuaries of knowledge and comfort. As families faced economic hardships, libraries offered free access to books, newspapers, and magazines. For many, they became essential escapes from the harsh realities of the Depression. Children discovered adventure stories, fairy tales, and picture books that sparked imagination. Adults turned to novels, biographies, and practical guides on farming, cooking, or budgeting. Popular works like Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind or John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men drew readers into new worlds while reflecting familiar struggles. Libraries were also community hubs. Story hours for children, reading clubs, and educational lectures kept people engaged. In some towns, New Deal funding helped expand collections or build new facilities, ensuring broader access. Librarians became trusted guides, recommending materials tailored to the needs of struggling families. Books provided more than entertainment, they offered hope, knowledge, and perspective. A single borrowed volume could transport a reader far from daily hardships, whether into the streets of Dickens's London or the plains of American pioneers. In a decade of uncertainty, libraries symbolized the enduring value of shared knowledge and the power of stories to sustain the human spirit. Fact: 41 jet engine patents filed in the 1930s. The 1930s were a decade of extraordinary technological imagination, even amid the backdrop of the Great Depression. Among the most groundbreaking developments of this era was the filing of patents related to the jet engine. While jet propulsion as an idea had existed for centuries in theoretical form, it was in the 1930s that engineers began transforming it into a practical technology capable of revolutionizing aviation. In the United States, as well as in Europe, inventors began experimenting with designs that would eventually lead to the modern jet engine. One of the earliest pioneers was Frank Whittle, a British engineer, who filed his jet engine patent in 1930. In the United States, similar concepts were being discussed and tested, with American engineers monitoring progress closely. Though most Americans in the 1930s were focused on everyday survival, within research labs, a vision of faster-than-ever air travel was quietly taking shape. The significance of these early patents cannot be overstated. The technology promised aircraft that could fly higher, faster, and more efficiently than propeller-driven planes. Though jet-powered flight would not become a reality until the 1940s, the foundation was laid in the decade before, when engineers first documented workable designs and tested rudimentary prototypes. At the time, these patents were little known outside engineering circles, overshadowed by more immediate Depression-era concerns. Yet in retrospect, they marked the beginning of an aviation revolution. Within 2 decades, the jet would shrink the globe, enable commercial airlines to carry passengers across oceans in hours rather than days, and become central to military strategy. The 1930s patents serve as a reminder that innovation often begins quietly, with sketches, applications, and prototypes that seem distant from everyday life. Still, their impact would ripple forward, demonstrating that even in an era marked by economic hardship, visionary thinking could set the stage for the modern world of flight. Fact: 42 nylon, invented by DuPont in 1935. In the mid-1930s, a remarkable synthetic fiber was introduced that would forever change clothing, industry, and consumer goods. In 1935, researchers at DuPont, led by Wallace Carruthers, successfully created nylon. This was the world's first fully synthetic fiber, born not from natural materials like cotton, wool, or silk, but from human chemistry. Nylon quickly became celebrated for its strength, elasticity, and resistance to wear. It could be manufactured in large quantities, dyed into any color, and woven into fabrics that were both durable and lightweight. Early applications ranged from toothbrush bristles to stockings, offering consumers affordable, modern alternatives to traditional materials. For American women, nylon stockings were one of the most visible and exciting innovations. They provided the look and feel of silk, but were more affordable and practical. When first released to the public in 1939, nylon stockings sold out almost instantly, proving the enormous demand for this new fabric. Beyond fashion, nylon played a vital role in industry and technology. It was used for ropes, parachutes, fishing lines, and even military gear in the years ahead. The development showed how chemistry could move beyond the laboratory into everyday life, reshaping consumer culture. Nylon symbolized the optimism of the 1930s, a belief that science and invention could make life better, easier, and more stylish. While the Great Depression forced many Americans to cut back, nylon represented a vision of progress, showing that innovation could continue even in lean times. Its invention also marked the beginning of the synthetic materials revolution, paving the way for plastics, polyesters, and countless modern fibers. In this way, nylon was not just a fabric but a milestone in humanity's ability to design its own materials for the future. Fact 43. First photocopier concept developed. During the 1930s, the seeds of a technology that would eventually dominate offices around the world were planted: the photocopier. In 1938, Chester Carlson, an American physicist and inventor, created the first successful process for what he called electrophotography. This system would later become known as xerography, the foundation for modern photocopying. At the time, reproducing documents was a slow and tedious process. Carbon paper, mimeographs, or manual copying were the norm, all of which were inefficient. Carlson, frustrated by this while working as a patent clerk, dreamed of a better solution. He developed a method that used static electricity and powdered toner to transfer and fix images onto paper. Though crude in its earliest form, Carlson's invention was revolutionary. In 1938, he produced the first xerographic copy, using the phrase 102238 Astoria, which marked the date and place of his experiment. Few realized at the time how significant this breakthrough would be. Large companies initially dismissed Carlson's idea, believing it impractical. It wasn't until the 1940s and 1950s that his work gained serious attention, leading to the creation of Xerox machines. By the second half of the 20th century, photocopiers became indispensable in businesses, schools, and government offices. The 1930s concept represented the quiet start of a technology that would transform information sharing. Carlson's determination showed how one inventor's persistence, even in a time of economic struggle, could spark innovations that would eventually touch every corner of modern life. Fact 44. FM radio emerges in the 1930s. The 1930s marked a turning point in the way sound was transmitted and received, thanks to the development of frequency modulation, better known as FM radio. Prior to this, most broadcasts relied on amplitude modulation, AM, which carried voices and music across long distances, but was prone to static, distortion, and interference from electrical storms or nearby equipment. In 1933, American engineer Edwin Howard Armstrong introduced frequency modulation, a system that dramatically improved the clarity and quality of radio sound. Instead of varying the strength, amplitude of a signal, FM varied its frequency. This breakthrough reduced background noise and produced a sound that was clearer, especially for music. Initially, FM was slow to gain acceptance. Major radio corporations, heavily invested in AM infrastructure, were hesitant to adopt it. Nevertheless, Armstrong tirelessly promoted his invention, setting up demonstration stations that showcased the superior quality of FM broadcasts. Musicians and engineers who experienced the crystal-clear sound were immediately impressed. Although the Great Depression made widespread adoption difficult, FM represented the future of radio technology. By the late 1930s, a handful of experimental FM stations were on the air, thrilling small audiences with sound that felt remarkably lifelike compared to the tinny, static-filled AM broadcasts. The full impact of FM would not be realized until the 1940s and beyond, when it became the dominant system for music broadcasting. Still, the seeds planted in the 1930s laid the groundwork for modern radio, influencing not only entertainment, but also the development of other wireless technologies. Armstrong's vision showed how even in an era of scarcity, innovation could tune into a better-sounding future. Fact 45. Frozen foods and Clarence Birdseye. One of the most practical and transformative food innovations of the 1930s was the rise of frozen foods, pioneered by Clarence Birdseye. Although Birdseye had experimented with quick freezing methods as early as the 1920s, it was during the 1930s that his technology began reaching American households. Birdseye observed that food frozen rapidly retained flavor, texture, and nutritional value far better than food frozen slowly. He developed a process using extreme cold and specialized packaging that allowed fish, vegetables, and meats to be preserved for long periods without losing their quality. In 1930, the first packages of Birdseye frozen foods went on sale in Springfield, Massachusetts. The innovation was revolutionary. For the first time, families could enjoy peas in January or fish far from the ocean. Frozen foods promised convenience, variety, and improved diets, especially important during a decade when fresh produce was often seasonal or scarce. However, adoption was initially limited, as few households had the electric freezers necessary to store frozen goods. By the mid-1930s, as refrigerators with freezer compartments became more common, frozen foods grew in popularity, grocery stores began stocking them, and consumers learned that the new technology could save time in the kitchen while ensuring consistent meals year-round. Birdseye's invention did more than change shopping habits, it reshaped global food distribution. It allowed perishable items to be transported across long distances, paving the way for modern frozen food industries. His contribution illustrated how innovation in food preservation could improve daily life, even in times of economic hardship. Fact 46. Technicolor revolutionizes cinema. Cinema in the 1930s underwent a dazzling transformation with the rise of Technicolor, a process that brought vibrant, realistic color to the silver screen. While experiments with color film had existed for decades, they were limited, unstable, and often produced unnatural tones. In 1932, the introduction of the three-strip Technicolor process changed everything. This technique captured red, green, and blue light separately, combining them into rich, lifelike color images. The results were breathtaking, making films more immersive and visually captivating. Audiences accustomed to black and white features were suddenly transported into a world of vivid hues. The first major feature to use the new Technicolor system was Walt Disney's short Flowers and Trees in 1932, which won an Academy Award. Soon after, live-action films such as Becky Sharp in 1935 and The Adventures of Robin Hood in 1938 showcased the process on a larger scale. Technicolor required specialized cameras and was expensive, limiting its use initially to high-budget productions. However, the allure of color drew audiences, and studios increasingly invested in the technology. Costumes, sets, and lighting were all designed to maximize the spectacle of color, influencing artistic choices in filmmaking. By the end of the decade, Technicolor had redefined the visual possibilities of cinema. It prepared the way for masterpieces such as The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind in 1939, which solidified color film as the future of Hollywood. Technicolor was not just a technical achievement, it was an artistic revolution that reshaped storytelling forever. Fact 47. The Golden Gate Bridge. Completed in 1937. In the midst of the Great Depression, one of America's greatest engineering triumphs rose above San Francisco Bay, the Golden Gate Bridge. Completed in 1937, it was the longest suspension bridge in the world at the time, and quickly became a symbol of American ingenuity and resilience. Designed by engineer Joseph Strauss, with contributions from Charles Alton Ellis and architect Irving Morrow, the bridge stretched more than 1 mile across the treacherous Golden Gate Strait. Its towers soared 746 feet above the water, while its sweeping cables created a breathtaking silhouette. Construction began in 1933, providing much-needed jobs during the Depression. Workers endured dangerous conditions, from fierce winds to fog and treacherous waters. Yet innovative safety measures, such as a safety net suspended beneath the bridge, saved the lives of 19 workers, a record for construction safety at the time. When the bridge opened on May 27, 1937, it captured the imagination of the world. Pedestrians crossed first, marveling at the panoramic views, before vehicles were allowed. Painted in its now iconic international orange, the bridge stood out against the bay and quickly became a beloved landmark. The Golden Gate Bridge was more than an engineering project. It was a symbol of hope during a time of struggle. It demonstrated that even in the hardest years of the Depression, Americans could dream big, build boldly, and leave behind a lasting monument to perseverance. Fact: 48 Hoover Dam, completed in 1936. Another monumental achievement of the 1930s was the completion of Hoover Dam in 1936. Straddling the border of Nevada and Arizona, the dam harnessed the power of the Colorado River, providing electricity, irrigation, and flood control to a vast region of the American West. Construction began in 1931 under the Bureau of Reclamation, employing thousands of workers at the height of the Depression. The project demanded immense amounts of concrete, steel, and labor. Men toiled in extreme desert heat, carving tunnels, pouring concrete, and erecting one of the largest structures ever built at the time. When completed, Hoover Dam stood at 726 feet tall and spanned more than 1,200 feet across Black Canyon. Behind it, Lake Mead became the largest reservoir in the United States. The dam's hydroelectric generators supplied power to cities and industries, fueling growth in the Southwest. Beyond its utility, Hoover Dam symbolized the ability of the federal government to undertake bold projects that reshaped the nation. It provided jobs during desperate times, inspired awe, and remains an enduring testament to American engineering. Even today, it stands as a landmark of human determination and the transformative power of infrastructure. Fact 49. Advances in aviation. The DC-3 airplane. The 1930s witnessed remarkable progress in aviation, culminating in the introduction of the Douglas DC-3 airplane in 1935. This twin-engine aircraft revolutionized air travel, becoming the first commercially successful plane to combine efficiency, comfort, and profitability. Prior to the DC-3, airlines struggled to make passenger flights profitable without government subsidies. Most planes were small, noisy, and uncomfortable. The DC-3 changed that. With seating for more than 20 passengers, streamlined design, and reliable engines, it made long-distance air travel appealing to the public. The DC-3 was also highly versatile, capable of carrying both passengers and cargo. Its range allowed it to fly from New York to Chicago without stopping, a major achievement at the time. Airlines such as American, United, and TWA quickly adopted the aircraft, ushering in a new era of commercial aviation. Beyond passenger service, the DC-3 became a workhorse for military and cargo operations, particularly in the years leading to World War II. Its durability and adaptability earned it the nickname Goonie Bird, and thousands were produced. The arrival of the DC-3 demonstrated how innovation in design could transform not just an industry, but the way people lived. Air travel became a practical reality for the middle class, setting the stage for the modern airline industry we know today. Fact 50. The first supermarket opens. In 1930, the concept of the supermarket was introduced with the opening of King Cullen in Queens, New York. Founded by Michael J. Cullen, it was the first store to combine wide product selection, self-service shopping, and discounted prices under one roof. This new model transformed the way Americans bought their groceries. Before supermarkets, families shopped at small specialty stores, visiting the butcher, the baker, or the greengrocer separately. King Cullen offered everything in one place, arranged in aisles where customers could push carts, select items, and pay at central registers. The store's slogan, "Pile it high, sell it low," emphasized affordability and efficiency. The supermarket concept spread quickly during the 1930s, especially as consumers sought value during the Depression. Shoppers could now find canned goods, fresh produce, meats, and household supplies in a single trip. Bright lighting, organized displays, and promotional sales created a modern shopping experience that felt both practical and exciting. Supermarkets also reshaped communities. They influenced diets by increasing access to packaged and processed foods, and changed urban design by requiring larger spaces and parking areas. By the end of the decade, supermarkets were no longer an experiment. They were the future of retail, setting the foundation for the massive chains that would dominate American shopping in the 20th century. Fact 51. The roots of Polaroid photography. The roots of Polaroid technology stretch back to the 1930s, when Edwin Land, a brilliant young inventor, began experimenting with synthetic polarizing filters. In 1932, Land left Harvard to pursue his idea of developing inexpensive polarizing materials that could control light. By 1936, he had patented his process, laying the foundation for what would become Polaroid Corporation. Land's innovation was not originally intended for photography, but had a wide range of practical uses. His polarizing sheets were applied to sunglasses, reducing glare for drivers and outdoor workers, and later found applications in scientific instruments and military optics. These early successes provided the financial stability and credibility that Land needed to keep refining his vision. The concept of instant photography itself was not realized until the 1940s, but the groundwork was laid during this earlier decade. The Polaroid company, founded in 1937, grew rapidly by providing the U.S. military with optical devices such as periscopes and gun sights during World War II. This period of innovation positioned Land and his company to later revolutionize consumer photography. Though the instant camera was still years away, the 1930s represent the true beginning of Polaroid. They were years when Land's polarizing inventions reshaped industries, proving that light itself could be manipulated for human benefit. This intersection of science, commerce, and creativity was a hallmark of Land's career, and foreshadowed a cultural shift in how people would one day capture and share memories instantly. Fact 52. The electron microscope. One of the most significant scientific breakthroughs of the 1930s was the invention of the electron microscope. Traditional light microscopes, limited by the wavelength of visible light, could only magnify objects up to about 1,000 times. For scientists eager to explore the smallest structures of life and matter, this was not enough. In 1931, German engineers Ernst Ruska and Max Knoll developed the first working electron microscope. By using beams of electrons instead of light, they created an instrument capable of far greater resolution. Electrons have much shorter wavelengths than light, allowing the microscope to reveal structures invisible to optical microscopes. This breakthrough allowed scientists to peer inside cells, study viruses, and explore the fine details of metals, crystals, and biological tissues. For the first time, humanity could see the ultrastructure of life itself, a discovery that would revolutionize biology and medicine in the decades that followed. In 1986, decades after his initial work, Ruska received the Nobel Prize in Physics for this invention, underscoring its transformative impact. But the roots of that achievement lay firmly in the 1930s, when the dream of seeing the invisible became a practical reality. The electron microscope was not just a tool, it was a new way of knowing the world. Fact 53. Early computing machines. The 1930s were a pivotal decade for computing. Though far from the digital devices we use today, these early machines represented the first serious attempts to automate calculation on a large scale. In 1936, Alan Turing, a British mathematician, published his famous paper introducing the concept of a universal machine, later called the Turing machine. This theoretical device could simulate the logic of any calculation, providing the foundation for modern computing. Though purely abstract at the time, it was revolutionary in outlining how machines could think in structured steps. Meanwhile, in Germany, Konrad Zuse was building mechanical and electromechanical calculators. His Z1 computer, completed in 1938, was one of the first programmable machines. Using punched tape to feed instructions, it hinted at the future of programmable logic. In the United States, Harvard's Howard Aiken began work on what would become the Harvard Mark I, and engineers at IBM were also developing tabulating equipment. These efforts laid the groundwork for electronic computers of the 1940s. The computing work of the 1930s may have seemed obscure to the public, but it signaled a profound shift. The decade proved that calculation was no longer the sole domain of the human mind. Machines could handle complexity, paving the way for the digital revolution that would transform the 20th century. Fact 54. Radar technology emerges. Radar, short for radio detection and ranging, first emerged in the 1930s as nations sought to harness radio waves for defense and navigation. Early experiments showed that radio waves could bounce off objects, revealing their distance and movement. In 1935, British engineer Robert Watson Watt successfully demonstrated a radar system that could detect aircraft. This breakthrough was soon developed into a network of radar stations across Britain, known as Chain Home, which would later play a decisive role in the Battle of Britain during World War II. Other countries, including Germany, the United States, and Japan, were also developing radar technology during this time. Each nation recognized its potential for both military and civilian uses. From air defense to maritime navigation, radar changed the very nature of warfare and transportation. It gave militaries the ability to see beyond the horizon, even in darkness or fog. For civilians, radar would later guide ships safely through storms and help aircraft navigate safely. By the close of the 1930s, Radar had moved from theoretical experiment to practical tool. Though still in its infancy, it represented one of the most important technological leaps of the 20th century, reshaping how humanity perceived and controlled space. Fact 55. Synthetic rubber. The 1930s were also the decade when synthetic rubber emerged as a viable material. Natural rubber, sourced primarily from plantations in Southeast Asia, was in high demand for tires, industrial goods, and consumer products. But reliance on distant sources made it strategically vulnerable, particularly as global tensions grew. In 1931, German chemists at IG Farben developed Buna rubber, one of the first synthetic alternatives. By polymerizing butadiene, they created a material that could mimic many properties of natural rubber. Though initially expensive, it represented a crucial step toward industrial self-sufficiency. The United States also pursued synthetic rubber research during the decade, with companies like DuPont experimenting with neoprene, introduced in 1930. Neoprene proved resistant to oil, heat, and weathering, making it invaluable for hoses, gaskets, and protective clothing. Synthetic rubber would prove essential during World War II, when access to natural rubber was cut off by Japanese control of Southeast Asian plantations. The groundwork laid in the 1930s ensured that wartime industries could continue producing vehicles, aircraft, and weapons. The creation of synthetic rubber highlighted the power of chemistry to substitute nature, transforming industries and reshaping global trade dependencies. Fact 56. Nuclear fission discovered. One of the most groundbreaking scientific discoveries of the 1930s was nuclear fission, the process by which an atomic nucleus splits into smaller parts, releasing immense energy. In December of 1938, German scientists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann bombarded uranium with neutrons, discovering that it split into lighter elements such as barium. Their colleague Lise Meitner, working in exile, and physicist Otto Frisch correctly interpreted this as nuclear fission. The discovery was startling. It suggested that vast amounts of energy could be released from matter itself. Within months, physicists around the world realized the implications, both for new energy sources and for devastating weapons. Although nuclear power plants and atomic bombs were still years away, the 1930s marked the scientific birth of the nuclear age. The discovery of fission would shape global politics, science, and ethics throughout the 20th century, making the late 1930s one of the most consequential moments in human history. Fact 57. Jet propulsion advances. While the concept of the jet engine dated back earlier, it was during the 1930s that real progress was made in turning theory into working prototypes. In Britain, Frank Whittle patented a design for a turbojet engine in 1930, and by 1937 he had built and tested a prototype engine. Meanwhile, in Germany, Hans von Ohain was working on similar concepts, leading to the first jet-powered aircraft flight in 1939. These early engines promised faster, higher-flying aircraft than propeller-driven planes could achieve. Though development was slow and expensive, the potential was clear to militaries around the world. The jet engine would not fully transform aviation until the 1940s and 50s, but the foundational breakthroughs occurred in the 1930s. They represented a vision of speed and power that would define modern flight. Fact 58. The rise of television broadcasting. Although experimental television broadcasts began in the 1920s, it was the 1930s that saw the medium begin to take shape as a practical technology. In 1936, the BBC launched the world's first regular high-definition television service in London, using the electronic system developed by engineer Marconi EMI. In the United States, companies such as RCA and CBS were also experimenting with broadcasts, demonstrating the technology at the New York World's Fair in 1939. Early television sets were expensive and offered small, grainy pictures, but the novelty captured public imagination. Families who could afford them gathered around to watch news, sports, and entertainment transmitted live a revolutionary shift from radio. Though television would not become widespread until after World War II, the 1930s laid the foundation. They were the years when television proved itself real, signaling the coming transformation of media, culture, and politics. Fact 59. Ballpoint pen patented. The humble ballpoint pen, now a staple of daily life, was born in the 1930s. In 1938, Hungarian-Argentine journalist Laszlo Biro patented his design for a pen that used a rolling ball mechanism to deliver quick-drying ink smoothly onto paper. Unlike fountain pens, which required constant refilling and often smudged, the ballpoint offered convenience, durability, and cleaner writing. Biro's invention was initially marketed in Argentina and quickly found popularity. The outbreak of World War II further boosted the ballpoint's adoption, as airmen and soldiers appreciated a pen that could write at high altitudes without leaking. Though the pens were initially expensive, mass production after the war made them affordable for all. The roots of this revolution, however, lay in the 1930s, when one man's frustration with smudged newsprint led to a tool that would transform communication worldwide. Fact 60. Nylon stockings and consumer culture. Nylon, invented by DuPont in the mid-1930s, was one of the first fully synthetic fibers. It was stronger than silk, resistant to runs, and inexpensive to produce. In 1939, nylon made its public debut at the New York World's Fair, where it was showcased as a marvel of modern chemistry. Most famously, nylon was used to create women's stockings. When they first went on sale in May of 1940, they sold out in hours, sparking a consumer craze. Women embraced nylon hosiery for its durability and affordability, while manufacturers hailed it as the future of fashion. The success of nylon signaled a new era of synthetic materials. It demonstrated how chemistry could invent not just functional materials but also products that shaped culture and identity. In the years that followed, nylon would be used in parachutes, ropes, toothbrush bristles, and countless other items. The late 1930s thus marked the birth of a synthetic age, where science and fashion intersected to create new possibilities for everyday life. 61. Babe Ruth retires in 1935. The year was 1935. Baseball, already deeply woven into the American spirit, was about to close the curtain on one of its greatest performers. George Herman Babe Ruth, the man who transformed the sport from a pastime into a spectacle, announced that his playing days were coming to an end. It was not just the retirement of a player, it was the farewell of a living legend. Babe Ruth had come to embody more than just baseball. To many, he was the symbol of an era, a beacon of possibility in the midst of challenge. He rose during the 1920s, a time when America was roaring with jazz, industry, and dreams of modern life. His home runs were not just numbers on a scoreboard, they were towering arcs of hope, cutting through the weight of ordinary days. By 1935, however, the Babe was no longer the fleet-footed, power-hitting marvel he once had been. His body had endured years of play, travel, and strain. The once magical swing had grown slower, and the cheers, though still loud, were tinged with nostalgia. Yet, even in decline, Ruth commanded a presence. Ballparks still filled to catch a glimpse of him, fans knowing they were watching history walk to the plate. He finished his career with the Boston Braves, far from the pinstripes of Yankee Stadium where he had built his legend. His final games were less about the statistics and more about the emotion of farewell. The nation, still wrestling with the hardships of the Great Depression, gathered around his last moments on the diamond as if closing a beloved chapter together. What Babe Ruth left behind was staggering. 714 home runs, a batting average that soared above 340, championships, unforgettable moments, and a reputation for making baseball larger than life. But beyond the numbers, his legacy was measured in imagination. Children swung broomsticks pretending to be him. Newspapers followed his every move. He was the first true sports celebrity, the face on candy wrappers, the story told at dinner tables. In retirement, Ruth remained a figure of fascination. He dreamed of managing a team, though the chance never fully came his way. Still, his presence in the stands, his willingness to meet young fans, and his larger-than-life personality kept his story alive. When he passed away in 1948, America mourned not only a ball player, but a cultural hero who had carried them through decades of change. The retirement of Babe Ruth in 1935 was more than a career ending. It was the closing of baseball's first great myth, the moment when a man who had once seemed immortal stepped back and let time take its course. His legend, however, remains as fresh as ever, proof that sometimes one swing can echo across generations. 62. Lou Gehrig's Iron Horse Streak. The story of Lou Gehrig is not just about strength of body, but strength of spirit. Known as the Iron Horse, Gehrig became the very symbol of endurance and quiet determination. His famous consecutive game streak began in 1925, when he stepped into the lineup for the New York Yankees. From that moment forward, he would not sit down, not even for a day, not even for an injury. For 14 long years, Gehrig ran out onto the field day after day, a steady presence in a sport often marked by change. By the time his streak ended, Gehrig had played in 2,130 consecutive games. It was a number so large that it felt untouchable. But the real wonder was not the statistic, it was what it represented. Gehrig was never the loudest man in the clubhouse. He was not flamboyant like his teammate Babe Ruth. Instead, he was reliable, steady, a man teammates trusted and fans respected. His streak carried him through the highs of championships and the lows of personal fatigue. Fingers were broken, muscles were sore, yet Gehrig kept showing up. That was his gift to the game, a living reminder that greatness can be as much about perseverance as it is about power. Then came the cruel turn of fate. In 1939, Gehrig was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, a disease that would later bear his name. His body, which had carried him through years of play, suddenly betrayed him. On July 4th of that year, in front of a packed Yankee Stadium, he delivered what would become one of the most famous speeches in sports history. Calling himself the luckiest man on the face of the earth, Gehrig left the game with humility and grace. His streak stood as a record until Cal Ripken Jr. surpassed it more than half a century later. Yet even then, Gehrig's accomplishment carried a weight beyond the numbers. His resilience was not about chasing a record, but about duty to his team, to the fans, and to the spirit of the game. Lou Gehrig's Iron Horse streak was more than a measure of games played. It was the testament of a man who showed that true strength is not only found in swinging a bat, but in showing up every single day, ready to give your best. 63. Seabiscuit captures America's heart. In the depths of the Great Depression, when millions of Americans struggled to find hope, an unlikely hero emerged. Not a boxer, not a ball player, but a small racehorse with crooked legs and an underdog spirit. His name was Seabiscuit. Born in 1933, Seabiscuit did not look the part of a champion. He was small, often lazy, and dismissed by trainers who thought he would never amount to much. Yet under the guidance of trainer Tom Smith, jockey Red Pollard, and owner Charles Howard, Seabiscuit transformed into a symbol of resilience. By the mid-1930s, Seabiscuit was racing across America, defeating larger, faster horses with a heart that seemed boundless. Crowds filled racetracks, radios crackled with his exploits, and newspapers splashed his name across headlines. He was not just a horse, he was a story that people clung to, proof that even in hardship, the underdog could rise. The height of Seabiscuit's fame came in 1938, when he raced War Admiral, a Triple Crown winner, in what was billed as the match of the century. On that November day, Seabiscuit stunned the sporting world. Braking quickly, holding steady, and finally pulling away, he defeated the mighty War Admiral by 4 lengths. The country cheered as if it had been their own victory. Seabiscuit's triumph was more than sport. It was a shared experience, binding a nation that needed hope. Families gathered around radios, holding their breath together. Struggling men and women saw themselves in the little horse who kept running, no matter the odds. By the time he retired in 1940, Seabiscuit was more than a champion. He was a legend, a reminder that courage and perseverance can overcome even the steepest odds. 64. Joe Louis rises in boxing. The 1930s were a golden age of boxing, and among the fighters who captured the public's imagination, none shone brighter than Joe Louis, known as the Brown Bomber. Born in 1914, Louis rose from humble beginnings in Alabama to become one of the greatest heavyweight champions the sport had ever seen. Louis first burst onto the professional scene in 1934. His punches were quick, his style relentless, and his presence commanding. By 1937, he had captured the heavyweight championship, defeating James Braddock in a fight that signaled the start of his long reign. Louis would hold the title for over a decade, defending it successfully 25 times. But Louis's rise was about more than boxing. At a time when African Americans faced immense racial prejudice, Louis became a unifying figure. He carried himself with dignity, discipline, and quiet strength. His fights were not just sporting events, they were national moments. Perhaps his most famous victory came in 1938, when he faced Germany's Max Schmeling. 2 years earlier, Schmeling had beaten Louis, and Nazi propaganda had seized on the win as proof of racial superiority. When the rematch was scheduled, it became more than a fight. It was a symbolic clash between democracy and fascism. On that June night at Yankee Stadium, Louis delivered a devastating performance, knocking Schmeling out in just over 2 minutes. The victory reverberated far beyond the ring, giving Americans pride and sending a powerful message to the world. For years afterward, Joe Louis remained the standard of excellence in boxing. He was more than a champion, he was a symbol of perseverance, national unity, and quiet strength during turbulent times. 65. First televised baseball game, 1939. The year was 1939, and technology was slowly beginning to change the way people experienced the world. For decades, baseball had been a sport of the ballpark, and later, of the radio waves. Fans gathered at stadiums or clustered around radios, letting the sounds of the game carry them away. But in the summer of 1939, baseball entered a new frontier: television. On August 26th, in Brooklyn, New York, cameras were set up at Ebbets Field to broadcast a doubleheader between the Brooklyn Dodgers and the Cincinnati Reds. The broadcast was experimental, small, and primitive compared to modern standards. There were only a few hundred television sets in the city, many owned by electronics enthusiasts or displayed in shop windows. Yet, those who tuned in were witnessing history: the first televised Major League Baseball game. The broadcast was handled by NBC, using a handful of cameras. Viewers could see the pitcher, the batter, and sometimes the runners, though the coverage was far from seamless. There were no replays, no instant graphics, and the picture flickered in shades of grey. But for those watching, it was magical. For the first time, fans could see the action unfold from their living rooms. The Dodgers lost both games to the Reds that day, but the final score hardly mattered. What mattered was the beginning of a revolution. Television would go on to transform baseball, and indeed all sports, into shared national spectacles. No longer was attendance at the ballpark or tuning into a radio the only way to experience the game. A new medium had arrived that could carry the sights and sounds of baseball to millions. By the early 1940s, the spread of television slowed due to World War II, but once the war ended, the boom began. Baseball, already America's pastime, became one of the most televised sports. Players grew into national celebrities, their faces recognizable in every household. That modest broadcast in 1939 was the seed. It was a quiet but monumental moment, the marriage of America's beloved pastime with the power of moving pictures. 66. College football radio boom. In the 1920s and 1930s, as radios found their way into living rooms across the country, one sport quickly established itself as a perfect companion for the airwaves: college football. Before radio, the popularity of college football was mostly local. Alumni, students, and nearby fans filled stadiums, while newspapers carried game reports to the rest of the country. But once radio broadcasts began, college football was no longer limited by geography. Suddenly, a fan in Kansas could follow Notre Dame. A family in New York could listen to Michigan. Radio made the game national. By the mid-1920s, legendary broadcaster Graham McNamee and others brought the drama of the gridiron into homes, their voices rising with each play. For many families, Saturday afternoons became a ritual, gathering around the radio to hear the clash of college giants. The boom reached new heights in the 1930s. Teams like Notre Dame, Army, and USC became household names. The exploits of coaches like Knute Rockne and players like Galloping Ghost Red Grange were told and retold, fueling imaginations. Radio gave football a rhythm and poetry, painting pictures in words that stadium walls could no longer contain. This period also cemented college football as more than just a sport. It was part of American identity, binding together regions and generations. Even as the Great Depression weighed heavily on the nation, the voices on the radio gave fans something to cheer for, something to believe in. The college football radio boom did more than entertain. It built tradition, spread rivalries, and set the stage for the sport's eventual dominance on television. But in those early years, the magic of the unseen game, described with passion and drama over the airwaves, was enough to captivate a nation. 67. Jesse Owens wins the 1936 Berlin Olympics. The 1936 Summer Olympics in Berlin were meant to be a showcase for Adolf Hitler's vision of a superior race. Instead, they became the stage for one of the most powerful sporting triumphs in history: Jesse Owens's 4 gold medals. Owens, the son of sharecroppers and the grandson of enslaved people, had already proven himself as one of America's greatest track and field athletes. But in Berlin, under the gaze of Nazi propaganda, he became a symbol of defiance and excellence. Over the course of the Games, Owens won the 100-meter dash, the 200-meter sprint, the long jump, and as part of the 4x100 relay team. Each victory was a statement, each medal a direct challenge to Hitler's ideology of racial superiority. Perhaps the most famous moment came during the long jump, when Owens befriended German athlete Luz Long. Despite competing against him, Long offered Owens advice on his technique, helping him qualify for the finals. Owens went on to win gold, and the two athletes walked arm in arm before the crowd, an image of sportsmanship that outlived the poisonous politics of the time. Owens's 4 victories were celebrated around the world, but back home, the reality of racial segregation still weighed heavily. He returned to a country that cheered his success but did not fully grant him equality. Still, his triumph in Berlin remains one of the greatest moments in Olympic history, a reminder that courage, grace, and excellence can rise above hatred. 68. NFL slowly grows in popularity. Today, the National Football League stands as a cultural giant, but in the 1930s, professional football was still struggling to find its place. College football dominated headlines and fan interest, while the NFL was seen as rough, inconsistent, and secondary. Yet, during this decade, the seeds of future success were quietly planted. Teams like the Green Bay Packers and the Chicago Bears began to build followings. Rule changes such as the legalization of the forward pass in earlier years made the game more exciting and watchable. Radio broadcasts slowly expanded interest, though not nearly on the scale of college football. One of the pivotal figures was George Halas, player-coach of the Bears, who pushed for innovations and stability. Rivalries began to form, giving fans reasons to invest emotionally. The NFL championship game, first played in 1933, added legitimacy and structure. Still, attendance lagged, and many franchises folded. But the persistence of the league through the Depression years was itself remarkable. By the end of the 1930s, the NFL was no longer just an afterthought. It was a league, learning to survive, preparing for the explosive growth that would come in the post-war years. The slow, steady climb of the NFL in the 1930s reminds us that even the mightiest institutions often begin in modest, uncertain ways. 69. Boston Bruins hockey prominence. In the 1930s, as sports heroes captured headlines across the United States, hockey was carving its own place. The Boston Bruins, one of the original 6 teams of the National Hockey League, rose to prominence during this decade. Founded in 1924, the Bruins were the first American team in the NHL. At first, they struggled. But by the 1930s, under coach and general manager Art Ross, the team blossomed. With stars like Eddie Shaw, Tiny Thompson, and Dit Clapper, the Bruins became a powerhouse. In 1929, they won their first Stanley Cup. Just 2 years later, in 1931, they finished with one of the best records in league history. Fans in Boston, already passionate about sports, embraced the team wholeheartedly. The Bruins represented toughness, resilience, and pride, fitting perfectly with the spirit of New England. Their battles on the ice became legendary, and their success helped solidify hockey's place in American sports culture. By the time the decade closed, the Boston Bruins were not only contenders, they were champions who had brought hockey into the spotlight for U.S. fans, proving that the sport could thrive south of the Canadian border. 70. First Masters Golf Tournament, 1934. The Masters Tournament, now one of golf's most prestigious events, had humble beginnings in 1934. Bobby Jones, one of the game's greats, had retired from competitive play, but he envisioned a new kind of tournament. Along with investment banker Clifford Roberts, he founded the Augusta National Golf Club in Georgia and launched the Masters. The first tournament, then called the Augusta National Invitational, was held in March of 1934. Horton Smith won that inaugural event, but the tournament itself was the true star. With its stunning azaleas, rolling greens, and unique traditions, Augusta became a sacred ground for golf. The Masters introduced innovations, like pairing players in twosomes and using scoreboards across the course, making the event more spectator-friendly. Over time, traditions such as the Green Jacket and the Champions Dinner would emerge, adding to its mystique. In those early years, the Masters was not yet the global spectacle it would become. But even then, players and fans sensed something special. It was golf presented not just as competition, but as a celebration of beauty, tradition, and sportsmanship. The first Masters in 1934 planted the roots of a tournament that today stands as a pinnacle in the world of golf. 71. College basketball leagues expand. During the 1930s, basketball was still a young sport, but its popularity on college campuses began to grow rapidly. The formation of leagues and regional tournaments gave fans new reasons to cheer. In 1938, The National Invitation Tournament, or NIT, debuted in New York City, drawing strong programs from across the country. Just 1 year later, in 1939, the first NCAA men's basketball tournament was held, with the University of Oregon defeating Ohio State in the championship game. Though the field was small, only 8 teams, the foundation for March Madness had been laid. College basketball's rise showed how the sport's speed and excitement could capture the national imagination. 72. Olympic heroes of the 1930s. The Olympics of the 1930s produced heroes who transcended sport. Beyond Jesse Owens in 1936, stars like Finland's Paavo Nurmi in distance running and Italy's Ondina Vala in hurdles inspired audiences worldwide. These athletes competed in a turbulent era, where politics and nationalism often overshadowed competition. Yet their dedication and performances reminded the world of the unifying spirit of the Games. The Berlin Olympics in 1936 were especially significant, with athletes standing as symbols of perseverance and global connection during uncertain times. 73. Tennis champions of the era. Tennis in the 1930s and 1940s saw legendary players dominate grass courts around the world. American stars like Don Budge captured global attention by winning all 4 major tournaments in 1938, becoming the first to achieve the Grand Slam. On the women's side, Helen Wills Moody carried dominance from the 1920s into the next decade, winning multiple Wimbledon and US championships. Tennis was still considered a sport of elegance and precision, yet these champions brought new intensity and competitive fire. Their victories helped expand tennis beyond elite circles into a more widely followed international sport. 74. The Harlem Globetrotters' rise. In 1926, the Harlem Globetrotters were founded in Chicago, and by the 1930s, they became ambassadors of basketball skill and entertainment. Combining dazzling ball handling, fast-paced play, and humor, they attracted audiences across America. While professional basketball was still struggling for recognition, the Globetrotters brought crowds to their feet, breaking barriers and showcasing African-American talent at a time of deep racial segregation. By the late 1930s, they were already traveling nationally, planting seeds for their future global tours. Their rise was proof that basketball could thrill and unite audiences far beyond traditional leagues. 75. Olympic Winter Games develop. The Winter Olympics of the 1930s and 1940s were smaller than the Summer Games, but they carried their own magic. In 1932, Lake Placid hosted the Games in the United States, highlighting skiing, skating, and bobsledding. The event gave Americans a deeper appreciation for winter sports and inspired new generations of athletes. The 1936 Garmisch-Partenkirchen Games in Germany further expanded participation, even as global tensions loomed. Though World War II cancelled the Games in 1940 and 1944, the Olympic flame of winter sport had already taken hold, preparing for greater prominence in the post-war years. 76. Women's track and field stars. The 1930s brought groundbreaking achievements for women in athletics. At the 1932 Los Angeles Olympics, American sprinter Babe Didrikson-Zaharias won 2 gold medals and 1 silver, astonishing audiences with her power and versatility. In 1936, athletes like Stella Walsh and Helen Stevens carried the torch forward, proving that women belonged on the global stage. Their determination, in an era when women's sports were often dismissed, paved the way for future generations. These track and field pioneers did more than win medals. They challenged stereotypes and expanded opportunities for women in sport. 77. Joe DiMaggio's emergence. In 1936, a young outfielder named Joe DiMaggio debuted for the New York Yankees. Almost immediately, his graceful swing and all-around talent made him a star. By the late 1930s, DiMaggio helped lead the Yankees to multiple championships, cementing their dynasty. His calm demeanor contrasted with the flamboyance of Babe Ruth, yet his excellence carried equal weight. DiMaggio's career would stretch through the 1940s, highlighted by his legendary 56-game hitting streak in 1941. His rise symbolized the next great chapter of baseball's golden age. 78. Boxing legends beyond Joe Louis. While Joe Louis dominated the heavyweight division, the 1930s and 1940s also featured other remarkable fighters. Middleweight champions like Henry Armstrong, who simultaneously held 3 titles in 1938, showcased unmatched endurance. Barney Ross, another standout, inspired fans with his grit inside and outside the ring. These fighters carried boxing into a new era of professionalism, giving fans drama and courage in the squared circle. Together, they kept the sport alive as one of America's most thrilling pastimes. 79. Ice hockey expands in North America. The 1930s marked steady growth for ice hockey across the United States and Canada. The original 6 teams, the Bruins, Canadiens, Maple Leafs, Blackhawks, Red Wings, and Rangers, dominated the NHL. In 1936, the Detroit Red Wings captured their first Stanley Cup, sparking enthusiasm in the Midwest. Radio coverage and newspaper stories spread hockey fever, helping it reach new fans. Though still centered in northern cities, the sport's intensity and speed gained recognition as a uniquely North American contribution to global athletics. 80. Golf legends of the 1930s. The 1930s were a golden decade for golf. Stars like Gene Sarazen, who won the Masters in 1935 with a famous double eagle, brought drama to the sport. Bobby Jones, though retired from competition, still shaped golf through the Masters. Meanwhile, Walter Hagen and rising younger players kept audiences engaged. Golf in this era was transitioning from a pastime of the wealthy to a sport celebrated by wider audiences, thanks to radio coverage and public courses. The 1930s golf legends gave the game both prestige and accessibility, laying the groundwork for future champions like Ben Hogan and Sam Snead. 91. Franklin D. Roosevelt elected in 1932. In 1932, the United States faced its greatest economic crisis. The Great Depression had left banks failing, unemployment soaring, and confidence shattered. Into this turmoil stepped Franklin Delano Roosevelt, governor of New York, who offered a message of hope and resilience. Campaigning on the promise of a New Deal for the American people, Roosevelt defeated incumbent Herbert Hoover in a landslide. His election marked more than a political shift. It was a turning point in national morale. Roosevelt's optimism, captured in his famous declaration that "the only thing we have to fear is fear itself," resonated with struggling Americans. His victory brought the belief that government could act boldly to restore prosperity and security. The 1932 election was not only about policy, but about trust. Roosevelt's ability to connect with ordinary citizens made him a transformative figure. His presidency would go on to redefine the role of government in American life. But it all began with the people's decision in 1932 to place their faith in his leadership. 92. New Deal programs reshape American work. Roosevelt's New Deal, launched in the early 1930s, revolutionized the way Americans thought about work and government responsibility. With unemployment at historic highs, the federal government introduced a wide range of programs designed to put people back to work, stimulate the economy, and restore stability. Projects under the New Deal built bridges, schools, post offices, and roads. Farmers received aid, banks were stabilized, and industries were restructured. Programs like the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Works Progress Administration directly employed millions, turning relief into dignity. For many families, these jobs meant food on the table and a renewed sense of purpose. The New Deal also changed the relationship between government and labor. For the first time, the federal government actively supported workers' rights, encouraged collective bargaining, and created standards for fair pay and hours. Though debated and challenged, the New Deal redefined work itself. It showed that even in the darkest times, organized national effort could rebuild livelihoods and inspire hope. 93. Social Security Act of 1935. One of the most enduring legacies of Roosevelt's New Deal was the Social Security Act, signed into law in 1935. At a time when poverty among the elderly was widespread, this landmark legislation created a system of financial support that would ensure stability for generations. Social Security introduced pensions for retired workers, unemployment insurance, and aid for dependent children and the disabled. It was a bold step, establishing the principle that the government had a responsibility to safeguard citizens against life's hardships. For millions of Americans, the act provided not just money, but peace of mind. Though initially controversial, Social Security became deeply woven into the fabric of American life. Critics worried about cost and government control, while supporters saw it as a moral duty. Over time, it became one of the nation's most trusted institutions. The 1935 Social Security Act remains a cornerstone of American policy, reflecting the New Deal's vision of security, fairness, and dignity in work and retirement. 94. WPA and CCC employ millions. Among the most visible and beloved New Deal programs were the Works Progress Administration, or WPA, and the Civilian Conservation Corps, or CCC. In the depths of the Depression, these initiatives provided not just jobs, but tangible improvements to communities across the nation. The CCC, launched in 1933, employed young men to restore forests, build parks, and conserve natural resources. They planted billions of trees, constructed trails, and fought soil erosion, leaving a lasting environmental legacy. The WPA, created in 1935, took on massive public works projects. Workers built bridges, schools, airports, and libraries. Artists, writers, and musicians were also employed, leaving behind murals, guidebooks, and performances that enriched cultural life. Together, these programs gave millions of unemployed Americans a chance to earn wages, support families, and regain self-respect. They also transformed the physical landscape of the United States, leaving landmarks still in use today. The WPA and CCC were more than relief. They were symbols of hope and national renewal during the hardest years of the Great Depression. 95. Women's role, shifts in workforce. The Great Depression and the New Deal era brought significant changes to women's work. While many industries cut jobs, women increasingly entered clerical, teaching, and nursing positions to support families. Though often paid less than men, their presence in the workforce became more visible and essential. New Deal programs occasionally reflected this shift. Some initiatives opened opportunities for women, though they faced discrimination and limits. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt championed women's rights, urging the inclusion of female voices in policy. The 1930s also saw cultural debates. Some argued women should stay home to allow men jobs, while others pointed to necessity. Families simply needed every possible income. Women's contribution to labor, whether through paid work or community efforts, proved vital to national survival. This era set the stage for the larger transformations that would come during World War II, when women would step fully into industrial roles. But even in the Depression, women were already reshaping the workforce, showing resilience and adaptability in hard times. 96. African American culture in Harlem Renaissance's late echoes. By the 1930s, the Harlem Renaissance of the 1920s had begun to wane, but its echoes remained strong. African American writers, musicians, and artists continued to shape culture, even as economic hardship hit black communities especially hard. Jazz clubs in Harlem still pulsed with innovation, with performers like Duke Ellington and Billie Holiday captivating audiences. Literature by Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston carried forward the themes of identity, pride, and resilience. The Depression also brought political awakening. African Americans began shifting political allegiance, with many supporting Roosevelt's New Deal. Despite continued discrimination, leaders pushed for equality in jobs and education, building momentum for future civil rights struggles. Though the Harlem Renaissance as a movement faded, its influence endured. The 1930s and 1940s carried its cultural spirit forward, ensuring that African American voices remained central to America's artistic and political life. 97. Labor strikes and unions grow stronger. The 1930s witnessed a powerful rise in organized labor. Amid widespread unemployment and wage cuts, workers demanded fair treatment, better pay, and safer conditions. Strikes erupted in industries from auto manufacturing to steel. The Wagner Act of 1935 guaranteed workers the right to organize and bargain collectively, strengthening unions. Groups like the Congress of Industrial Organizations, CIO, emerged, uniting workers across industries. Sit-down strikes, such as the famous General Motors strike in 1936 and 1937, forced companies to negotiate. Though sometimes met with violence, labor's growing strength reshaped the American workplace. Unions gave workers a voice, securing benefits and protections that remain today. The labor movement of the 1930s laid the groundwork for the modern balance between labor and management. 98. First woman elected to U.S. Senate Hattie Caraway. In 1932, Hattie Caraway of Arkansas became the first woman elected to the United States Senate. Appointed initially to fill her late husband's seat, she surprised many by running for the office in her own right and winning. Caraway's election challenged assumptions about women in politics. Though soft-spoken, she proved determined and effective, supporting New Deal programs and championing issues like veterans' benefits. She served until 1945, showing that women could hold power at the highest levels of government. Her achievement came in an era when women were still fighting for equal political voice. Caraway's victory opened the door for future generations of female leaders, making her a quiet but trailblazing figure in American democracy. 99. U.S. neutrality debates. Before World War II, as conflicts spread in Europe and Asia during the late 1930s, Americans debated fiercely whether to remain neutral. The trauma of World War I left many wary of foreign entanglements. Congress passed neutrality acts in 1935 and 1937 to limit involvement. Yet, as Germany advanced and Japan grew aggressive, neutrality became harder to maintain. Roosevelt, though constrained by public opinion, gradually pushed for aid to allies like Britain. Programs like Cash and Carry, and later Lend-Lease, reflected this shift. The debates revealed deep divides between isolationists and interventionists. Town halls, newspapers, and radio programs argued whether America should arm for war or stand apart. By the time of Pearl Harbor in 1941, neutrality was no longer an option. These pre-war debates showed America's struggle between caution and responsibility on the global stage. 100. Rise of newsreels in movie theaters. In the 1930s, movie theaters became more than places for entertainment. They became windows to the world. Before television, millions of Americans saw major events through newsreels shown before films. Produced weekly, these short films brought images of politics, wars, sports, and culture directly to audiences. Roosevelt's speeches, Olympic victories, and scenes from Europe appeared on screens across the country. For many, it was their first visual contact with distant events. Newsreels shaped public opinion, blending information with spectacle. In an age of limited media, they gave Americans a sense of connection to a rapidly changing world. By the time World War II began, newsreels had become essential, rallying national spirit with vivid images of soldiers and battlefields. The rise of newsreels in the 1930s showed how moving pictures could inform as well as entertain, setting the stage for the age of television.